Bonjour à tous. Merci d'être venus assister à notre session. Donc,
Hello everybody, thank you for joining us today. Session 4, Climate Change, Take Shelter. We're going to talk about this, all six of us. So the idea is to see whether we should just take shelter or maybe find some solutions. We'll see at our conclusion, but you see, we'll be able to see what we can do, because we know that climate change is causing upheaval in the world and in people's lives. And according to the World Bank, it says 216 million people are threatened by becoming climate refugees by 2050, and the economy as well is being threatened and is being transformed by climate change. More than half of the worldwide GDP, according to the World Bank, depends on ecosystems. So to talk about this, we have, I'm very pleased to work in partnership with Claire Vaisson from the Cercle des Économistes, who is the Director General of CDG, and we have four experts. My neighbor, sorry, with the wind, my my piece of paper is moving around, sorry about that. So we have Paolo Ribota, Director General of Zurich, France, Zurich Insurance France for the last year. I won't go through your whole career, but you're a distinguished professional practitioner in insurance. You work with Excel and generally. And next to Paolo, we have Avinash Masavi from India. It's the first time you've been to France, Azra. We hope to give you a good impression here in Aix-en-Provence and in France. Azra is an economics professor and a professor in women's studies at the Aligarh Muslim University in India. And she'll be able to help us a great deal, because she's worked a great deal on the dependency of certain Indian communities on forests. I'm summarizing, of course, your work in a few words, but you've worked a great deal on that. So next to Asa, we have Jacques Le Pape. You are the president of the board of directors of the Central Reassurance Board, which was founded in 1946. We can say, Jacques, that you are very much a public servant. You've worked on many different positions, the public service in Bercy, financial services. Then we have Romaric Lazerge. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Romaric, you are a partner at the Allen Overy law firm in Paris. And within the firm, on the worldwide level, you're responsible for public law within the firm, and also a university lecturer in political science over the last 20 years. Claire, perhaps I'll hand over to you now to give us an introduction to our session. Thank you very much, Anne. My name is Anne de Gugnier, at Le Figaro newspaper. I was going to introduce you, don't worry. So, yes, thank you, Anne. Hello, everybody, and welcome. If you start with the Rencontre d'Aix with a title like Climate Change, Take Shelter, we're taking the risk of making everybody feel rather gloomy. So don't worry. The idea of this roundtable is not to deny what is obvious. I'll start by reminding us of where we are at the moment in terms of climate, of course. The idea is to find solutions together. Climate change is here. I think everybody realizes this now. I'll give you a few facts based on the sixth IGPP report was published last year. We have some facts. We've already reached a heating greater than 1 degree compared to the pre-industrial period. We should reach 1.5 degrees by the beginning of the year 2030. So we are on a trajectory today which is going to lead us to an increase in temperature of 2 degrees. So we are in a situation at the moment where the greenhouse gas emissions are slowing down. That's good news. But we don't need them to just slow down. We need them to reduce, to actually start going down. Their rate of increase has started to slow down. We need them to actually go down and to decrease in absolute terms. So the growth in greenhouse gas emissions has slowed down, but we need them to actually go down. The facts are there. Climate change is a reality. So what does this mean? This means several things. This means, first of all, we have average temperatures that are higher. It also means we have extreme climate events, droughts and floods, fires. We can see that everywhere around the world every year. It also means we have a rather heterogeneous phenomenon. If you look at the world map of climate warming, this climate change will not be identical in every region and in every country. The northern hemisphere will be more severely affected than the southern hemisphere. And then within the countries and geographies, this climate warming is very uneven. Some population groups are affected more than others. Those in particular depend on agriculture are more severely impacted than others. Climate change will mean you have entire regions where it will be difficult to grow crops and to live. And the most vulnerable population groups are also affected most. And among those most vulnerable groups, we have to remember that often this is women who will be most severely affected by climate change. So once you've said that, the solution is not for everybody to just take shelter. We have to take action. We have to take action quickly. We don't have much time. And we have to take action in two areas. The first area is adaptation to climate change. Adaptation to climate change means that we need to change our means of production. We have to adapt our agriculture and our fishing techniques and adapt our cities and our infrastructures to a world which will be a world where the temperatures will be higher and where extreme climate events will be more numerous. So this is the first action we can take, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, during our session. The second type of action is what we call mitigation. Mitigation is a euphemism, really. It means how do we drastically reduce greenhouse gas emissions. You know, the most important thing is that all of the emissions emitted ever since the origin, so each additional emission of greenhouse gases today is added to a stock of greenhouse gas emissions. We have to bring down this stock of greenhouse gas emissions. So every effort is important. How do we reduce the stock of greenhouse gas emissions, greenhouse gases that have been emitted? In this area, we have two solutions. There are two types of solution. First of all, we have to consume less energy. This takes us back to the question of changing our means of production and consumption patterns, everything to do with energy efficiency and energy sufficiency. The other way of working is that we have to make our energies more green. Why do we have to do this? Because they are at the heart of greenhouse gas emissions. We have to make our energies more green. What does this mean? This also means we have to develop all of the zero carbon energies. We're thinking of electrical zero carbon energies, but tomorrow we'll be in a world where we'll have to not only electrify a number of different types of uses and have greener electricity, but we also have to make sure that all of energies are more green. Electricity and also gases. Use of gas has to be greener as well. And finally, I'd just like to say that the good news here is that, and this is what the IGPP says, when we look at the solutions that would enable us to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, roughly half of them are compatible with the price of a ton of carbon, that is a reduction of 20 euros for each ton of carbon. This means that half of the solutions today are economically viable and accessible. And I'll end with this. So we have to not only succeed in reducing greenhouse gases, but we have to do this, of course, in an affordable and acceptable way. And this is the challenge that confronts us. Finally, I'd like to say, rather than taking shelter, we have to get to work. Thank you very much, Claire. Thanks to Claire, we're already talking about concrete solutions, and we have the hope that we can do something. Thank you very much. Jacques, I'll turn to you as a reinsurer. You have a very concrete vision of climate change and global warming. Claire has already said something about this. Could you just explain to us, in concrete terms, over the last few years, how you've seen the effects of climate change? What is happening around the world, but especially, first of all, in France and in our country? What have you seen over the last 5 years, for example? We've seen many things, and it's true that concerning the major themes that Claire has mentioned, It's true that it's important to provide better protection for our people who have taken out insurance and our different partners. As you said, we need to better understand what we're talking about. With the risk is it will be too general or too technical. We have to find a good balance in our analysis between what we see in terms of climate change and find the solutions that are practical, often expensive, in order to protect people more effectively and give them shelter and enable them to deal with the consequences of climate change. Climate change is part of our daily lives now. Even this week, we saw the Beryl hurricane, which virtually destroyed a Caribbean island. And this is the time of year when the hurricanes normally are not very strong. And so we can see, if we look at things from a more scientific point of view, we can see that we have phenomena that are less and less predictable and more violent. So this is important to the world of insurance, and that's where we can help. So to answer your question, in France, what are we seeing? In France specifically, we're seeing more storms, we're seeing more flooding caused by the storms, and we are seeing the economic impacts of drought, whether it's for agriculture or for the daily lives of French citizens, and also consequences for the structure of housing. If you look at the winter rainfall and the greater droughts in the summer, we can see that in some regions where there is a clay soil, we are seeing more and more problems. So the question of reinsurance and climate change is exactly situated here. We have more droughts and more consequences for people and more requests for compensation, and we have floods, which have always existed. Our fund was created, the Fund for Natural Disasters was created 40 years ago to compensate victims of the Saône floods in Lyon. So this has always been one of our main activities. And of course, our activities have increased as time has gone by. So we have very concrete phenomena affecting the daily lives of French people. And for this, we have put in place this natural disaster fund, which everybody's familiar with, because unfortunately is becoming more and more well known. And this just demonstrates the impact of climate change on people's lives. I'm sure that I know that a quick study was carried out last year showing that 72% of French people are aware of the fact that climate change is going to cause greater damage for their property, and they have to find solutions for that. In the solutions, we have insurance, of course. To conclude, I would like to say, first of all, that insurance is one of the solutions. We can see that it's not very original in relation to climate change. In the more usual areas of insurance, for example, for damage to cars, insurance has always played a great role in road safety. For damage caused by fire in housing, insurance has also played a major role to prevent fire through construction standards. For climate change and its consequences, it's the same thing. The insurance companies, I'm sure my colleague here from Zurich Insurance will say more about this. We can also play a very important role to have an influence on the construction standards and norms, and to help local authorities to limit the impacts of flooding and drought on their citizens, because climate change is a reality and we have to find the right solutions. Thank you very much, Jacques. We've seen that Jacques has told us that the effects of climate change are very much present in France. We imagine that in India, of course, there are different consequences, but due to the economic situation, the subject is even more urgent. Azra, you have worked particularly with underprivileged communities in India. Could you explain to us, for these groups of people who you've studied, what is happening? How is their life affected directly by climate change in your country? You have a microphone just there.
As far as marginalized communities are concerned, I think Claire had said that the impact of climate change is felt differently by different people. And India being one of those countries which is developing, and we have a large population which is marginalized. And these are not just poor, but they also come from communities which are socially considered to be lower in hierarchy. Because forever they've been kind of suppressed, and they belong to what is called the scheduled castes and the scheduled tribes. So a large chunk of the poor population in India is marginalized, and these people have to end up bearing the brunt of climate change effects, primarily because of their existing vulnerabilities. So, which are basically in terms of their low educational levels or literacy levels, low skill set, very poor assets, and also their low socioeconomic status. These communities also face gendered vulnerabilities or based on their caste, class, and so they are mostly because like when I worked with these communities, I find that most of them reside on vulnerable, fragile lands, whether hillsides or coastlines or river basins and floodplains. So they are more prone to any extreme climate events which are happening more frequently and and they are more the extent on the damage caused by these events has increased substantially. So these communities are facing this problem because as a result of climate change events, they are more likely to be in the face of these events and face more harm, suffer more losses, and be poorer as an outcome. Even the relief that they will get will be delayed compared to the relief reaching other communities. So they are faced with a very, very difficult situation, considering the kind of marginalization that they are facing. So they are facing vulnerabilities which are very specific to them. Moreover, because of heat waves, what we are seeing is lowering of labor productivity as well as agricultural productivity and other natural resources productivity, which is causing a further impact in terms of loss of livelihoods for these communities. So a lot of men in these communities, and most of them are located in rural areas, so most of the men are migrating out to the cities in search of employment opportunities, leaving the women to take care of the families. And now women, unfortunately, in the scenario that we are discussing here, do not own assets. They have no asset ownership. And as a result, their condition is very precarious in these communities. And so now these women, and also educational level is very poor. It's poorer for women than for men. And these women are now faced with the issue of, or with the responsibility of providing care to the families and taking care of the livelihoods. So the societal norms are such that women are the caregivers and primary resource collectors in the rural societies. And in the absence of men, they bear the increased burden of also managing the livelihood for the family. Women on an average spend about 4 to 8 hours a day fetching water for the families and collecting firewood and other essential resources for the family's livelihood, and also working in agriculture wherever they can. We also know that women mostly get paid less wages than men. So this, even when the efforts are same, they are getting less in return. So the household level food security is getting impaired drastically because of all these factors. At the same time, these communities are also in such vulnerable state that they are finding it difficult to cope with a lot of issues related to climate change. For instance, we had done a study in Kashmir, and we found that when the women, if the water supply, that's in the rural areas, if the water supply is delayed or limited, then often the girls also stay back to help their mothers to fetch water, because the mothers alone are left and they cannot bring water home. So even the girls miss out on education when such kind of problems are there. And with the increasing water scarcity due to climate change, this is going to have an increasing detrimental effect on the well-being of women and girls and also young children. Even the food security at household level is going to be impaired. Thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup, Azra, pour cette description très...
Thank you for that very concrete description, Azra, of the effects of climate change on the poorest members of the communities. Well, Mary, I'll hand over to you now, perhaps. Your turn to give us a description. We have all heard with great emotion what Azra has described to us. What is the responsibility of the governments in general, not necessarily in India, but overall? What is the government's responsibility in general for these, in relation to these problems? Of course, I'm not talking about the responsibility of the Indian government. I'm not familiar with that, although it's very interesting to hear what you had to say. What I'm going to say will be more centered on France or on Europe. But to answer your question, Anne, obviously, amongst the players involved, Anna said that we have to take action, and Claire said that we have to take action, and we need to know how we do that and who has to do it. The first people who should be taking action are the governments, the states. It's the states, they have the power of enforcement and power to define standards, and they have democratic power to make major decisions in energy policy, to make these changes between to reduce energy dependency, to have the cheapest possible access to energy, and to reduce the level of carbon in our energy. And so they have in their hands their future of the community. So the states are responsible, and yes, we have to take action. 2 points, 2 pieces of good news. First of all, the good news, and Claire has already mentioned, is that, of course, it's perfectly unfair to say that the states in Europe are not doing anything. The states are taking action in terms of the climate. There is a lot of policies that have been in place that are very costly and that are being put in place. So if you just look at all of the projects every day in the newspapers, you see projects for offshore wind power, onshore wind power, for solar farms and hydroelectric projects. The states in Europe are taking action. I won't go into more detail, but clearly this is the case. However, as Claire also said, we are lagging behind. What we're doing is not sufficient. That's why the NGOs have turned to the justice system. That's the first point. It could be a source of hope. Perhaps I'll go through this quickly. Many of you in this room today have heard about the first movements for climate justice. In Europe, in particular, the Supreme Courts in European countries have started to condemn the governments for their lack of action on climate, because the standards have been adopted and defined by the states themselves, for example, in the Paris Agreement and the European standards for reduction of greenhouse gases. We're looking to 2030, less for 40% by 2030, and so the states will not be able to meet these objectives. And in France, we've seen this in the different courts in Paris and others. These courts have condemned the government for the lack of action, and they've I won't go into too much detail on these legal aspects. The first other 2 points I'd like to mention, which could be a source of hope or a source of action. The first aspect is that climate justice, and maybe there's some legal experts in the field. This is an interesting concept. We shouldn't count too much on climate justice as a concept, because judges don't really have much power. What happens in France? The Council of State condemns the government, but it condemns the state in relation to an objective which they know will not be achieved. They can't do much more than that. They can't go to the Prime Minister's office or the President's office or go to the National Assembly and say, okay, here are the laws that you need to vote. So this idea of climate justice, these condemnations are rather platonic, rather theoretical. Of course, the government is taking action, but the justice doesn't really have much leverage. And the NGOs have then turned after these first condemnations by the Council of State. Then they say you have to put this condemnation into execution. And the Council of State says, okay, it's not very easy. I will give them some more time, give the state more time to take action. So this little game can carry on for many years. And when after that, we have people criticizing the judges because they are replacing the government. So climate justice is an important symbolic and legal instrument, but it's not sufficient in itself. So the question is, if we look at it from the point of view of state action, how can the state take action more quickly? I don't have an obvious answer, of course, but just to end what I have to say, I'd like to take the example, which is quite a technical example, which I believe we could talk about, which I think is shows a form of preference in the short term, a form of lack of systematic consideration of climate change within the governments when concrete decisions are taken above and beyond the policies that are put in place and the billions of euros that are spent. Let me take the example. This is an example I'm working on, and I recommend a number of renewable energy producers receiving my advice at the moment. These are contracts for additional remuneration. What are these contracts? I'd like to try and keep it as simple as possible. These contracts consist in saying, as they've been assigned in the last few years, the state has said to energy producers, you're going to produce renewable energy. I'm going to set a floating tariff, which we'll call the reference tariff. If you sell electricity at a lower price, I will subsidize you. But if you are able to sell electricity at a higher price, and there's a reference price, then you have to refund the public aid, public subsidy. Up to then it's fine. Then the state also added, and if, once you've refunded me, you continue to receive income, then you'll be able to keep that income. That's very important because the private investors have been able to include this money in their business plans and in their future investments. So what has happened when we had the energy crisis that began? The level of the electricity tariffs began to increase on the markets, and so the renewable energy producers, first of all, were able to refund the public aid they'd received from the government, and then in a second stage, they began to benefit from market income. And the state said, this is a shame. This money is available. It's not really legitimate for private investors to receive this money. I'm going to take this money for myself. And so a law was enacted, and they modified the initial contracts, and they decided that the energy producers would only be able to receive the income from the floating tariff. This led to a number of difficulties because a number of energy producers were counting on this additional money and had anticipated it in their business plan. What does it illustrate? This shows that when this law was enacted, when you look at the impact study for this law, there isn't a single word about the potential taking into account of the impact on climate change and of the income of the energy producers. There's a few words about the investment by the state and the possible other positive aspects, but there's not a few words about the potential negative effects on the development of renewable energy sector. So you can debate about the well-foundedness of the action, and this is what I'm talking about, the preference for short-term action and looking at the long term.
So we'll stay with our hopes. There are progress is possible. Thank you. The example was really interesting. Paolo, you haven't taken the floor yet, and I think we will remain in your professional sphere, insurance, because of course insurance companies have a very important role to play to a company, and if possible more than a company, help in climate change issues. So Jacques said a few words on this, but could you tell us or explain very concretely what is the role of the insurance sector faced with this phenomenon, how you can contribute to find solutions? Well, thank you. When you look at the setting, I'll adopt an angle that's quite different. It's clear that the sectors, the insurance sector and reassurance sector, first of all, can have an important role when it comes to investments. The insurance sector invests in the long term, and so we have massive amounts of money that we need to manage. The first thing is we could reorient the mass of these investments towards assets that are going in the right direction, that is a positive direction when it comes to climate change. And it's a role that we sometimes forget that insurance companies have to take, because we manage a lot of money. Another important aspect is that beyond the role of the state government, that was well described, I think there's an essential role in the economy, and that is the role played by enterprises. Businesses do a series of investment, and the role of insurers, not only for companies but also for the communities, the role of insurers is aimed at supplying its know-how and providing its know-how so that companies, communities can use them. So we have data. We have data available. Data sets that are important, and if we complete this data with scientific data, we could help communities and enterprises to anticipate the impacts of climate change. So we're not there to fight against them, but to anticipate the effects of the climate change. And when you say anticipate, it's not for the sake of anticipating. It's anticipating so that we can provide a series of tools to better adapt and to place enterprises in a position where they can adapt their processes, their ways of working, their technologies, so that they go in the right direction in reducing carbon footprint and CO2 emissions. And this applies to communities also. Anticipation, adaptation are going in the right direction. They are the essential elements when it comes to increased resilience, the resilience of enterprises or the resilience of infrastructures, or even the resilience of communities. So I think that the role of insurance companies is in all the processes, it's really a question of investment. Don't always remember that enterprises, along with the state, have the most important role. They are the people who have the money. They do investment in billions of euros or hundreds of millions of euros, what have you. I think that if we can, with our own skills and competencies and know-how, if we accompany businesses and governments in the anticipation, I think that's essential. For those who attended the meetings last year, it was really hot. This year it's a bit better. I had our prevention engineers do a study to know what Aix-en-Provence would be like 20 years from now, by 2050, let's say. Could we still hold meetings like this in Aix-en-Provence? In the last 25 years, Aix-en-Provence is an average. In Parc Jourdan, where we are today, we had an average, and you all know the rules of the averages, but we had 13 days of temperatures over 35 degrees. And according to the hypothesis that we adopt of IPCC with a 2% increase, we see that by 2050, which is tomorrow, it will be the double of number of days with extreme heat. And if we go from 2.5 to the worst scenario, it'll be 3 times more days over 35 degrees. So these are concrete effects. What does that mean? To be able to anticipate, to know what's going to happen in the future. This helps companies in their investment choices to better understand where they should place their money, not only technologically speaking, but as far as geographical locations. And it's the same thing. We also have a societal role in the insurance sector. Some are more involved than others. We are responsible in the support of communities, whether they are urban or rural communities. And as the company I belong to is really committed with it as non-profit, but I will talk about what we did with the city of Madrid. The city of Madrid came to us saying there's a real need. It's a city, Madrid, that has heat waves that are very serious, and we need to better understand what by 2050 will be the situation, how the city can be more resilient, how our schools can welcome children. So we carried out studies and made recommendations. And of course, it's the city of Madrid that takes the decisions in the end. But we provided concrete tools. So to better answer the question, we have a role as international investors. We have a role as a technician with the data and to increase resilience. And Jacques mentioned that earlier. We have a role that is our own role. That is, we have to be supported by the central bank. And we need to use our results, use our money to take commitments to be able to supply contingent capital, whether to businesses or to families, households, what have you. And so I think that for us it's essential, key, to be able to make our techniques available to the people, techniques that will help to anticipate, understand the risk, analyze the risk, model the risks, and understand how these risks can be curbed and reduced with infrastructure, with investments, so that we see how we can manage financially these risks and transfer this on the results of insurers. That is a way to be able to contribute to bring forth solutions against climate change. So thank you. I have other things to say, but unfortunately time's up. And for the second round of questions, could you please all try to keep your answers to 3 minutes so we have time to hand over the floor to the floor. So I'm sorry I didn't hear who. So we understood what the role of private insurers was. You're a public reinsurer in the system. Where do you position yourselves? Well, the role of the public reinsurer is to see, in 3 minutes, please. Okay, 3 minutes. I'll try to. So 3 concrete points. We look at what the market can do and what we can do to help and make the market do more. 3 concrete examples. First, in the natural disaster regime, storms are not covered because insurance companies are capable of covering that with their private reinsurer. So we carried out a short study to see if that was possible, if there was enough capacity in the market to continue to insure people against storm events, for example. The answer is yes. So as long as things continue that way, we don't need to take action when it comes to storms or weather conditions or weather events. Make sure that insurance is available for all people in France, for example. We do a mapping to see if insurance companies are present, and of course we will encourage insurance companies to do more if needed, and if there are problems, we'll help them. That's the role of the public reinsurer. The second thing, concrete action, that was mentioned earlier, is to help people to take prevention measures, and that we work with insurance companies so that they help people to take prevention measures. So it's very concrete. We know that, for example, cracks in houses often linked or related to the fact that people want to have trees around their households, and the trees pump the water in the ground and it dries out the soil. And so better build, know where to plant trees. These are things that we try to bring insurance companies to do. It's not their specialty, but we try to encourage them to take action on that. It's like for fire prevention. We ask people to install the proper devices in their homes to protect themselves. So they need to develop methods so that people become aware that they can by themselves bring forth solutions when faced with the risks. And the last thing is the public reinsurer will see that we have the means to cover for expenditures, for example. So we will eventually increase our fees so we can cover that. So we can cover for expenditures. It's a little expensive, but it works. Thank you. So in the field of solutions, and that's what's good about a roundtable, thanks to Asra, we can go back to India. Asra, you detailed a few minutes ago the impact of climate change over Indian populations, for example, displacement of population. What we do to avoid, what are the solutions that you set forth in India to avoid population displacement? Are there solutions, in your opinion?
So, as I had said earlier also, it's a country with a a large chunk of its population which is marginalized. And we have about 60% of these poor communities subsisting on less than $3.1 per day. And they are mostly concentrated in rural areas. Displacement is a reality in the, due to climate change. It's always not easy to find solutions to displacement because the governments will find it very difficult to shift all these people from the marginal, fragile areas into other areas, because the reason that the country has a huge population, these people being lower in hierarchy are pushed to these areas. So what the government needs to do is develop policies which will address these gender issues in the face of climate change. So for that, the government needs to focus on gender budgeting of the funds, because until and unless funds are targeted to address the specific communities and their plight in the face of climate change, it will not be possible to do climate justice and equity. So this needs to be done. Secondly, what is also very important is to, I think you talked about the role of NGOs. So at the ground level, the NGOs should be involved and be part of the actions taken to address the issues. At the same time, it's also very important to take the stakeholders on board when making policies, because mostly what we see, policies are made on top, and so they're really not effective until unless somebody who's being affected by those by the climate change events is not part of the policy making body. Their concerns are never going to be heard. So the marginalized communities, the women, the youth, all need to be part of these decision making processes. Moreover, as I said, that these communities are very poor, illiterate, and also are marginalized, so their representation is also not there and their voice is also not heard. So the government needs to empower them enough, and the women in the communities, so that their concerns, they can represent their concerns and they can raise their concerns adequately. Thirdly, what also needs to be done is by involving these communities, the local academic institutions, the NGOs, and also the corporate through their social and environmental responsibility, everybody coming together to address the problems of climate change effects would make policies and efforts more effective on the ground. And I also feel that governments must make an effort for building climate resilient shelters for these communities, because time and again they are going to be displaced, but at least if there are shelters where they can go and save themselves, they will not have to be displaced to very far off places. So this is very important, plus also planting more trees, which is so very important, and also developing indigenous or rather using indigenous methods of water conservation, because the green infrastructure needs to be built instead of those concrete dams which cause more displacement and harm. Rather than addressing climate change, we need to develop the traditional water conservation strategies, and so that more people can benefit from those rather than be displaced from those. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Asra. Romaric, il y a aussi des acteurs.
Thank you, Asra. There are also other players that play an essential role, that are the NGOs. And so, in what extent are they part of the solution, and how can they evolve? We see a lot of actions and things, but beyond these visible aspects, how do NGOs influence enterprises? We talked about NGOs, okay. We've all talked about businesses and corporations. How NGOs make enterprises change? Well, I think that it's through a dialogue. That is, there's a text In France, for example, the law on the vigilance, the law on vigilance. So this consists for enterprises, the largest corporations in France, and soon smaller concerns, their responsibility to identify the risks that their activity lead to on the value chain, on the environment, and they need to propose solutions to prevent or mitigate these risks. So the NGOs, within the scope of the definition of the vigilance plans of enterprises, it's an example, have a role as stakeholders, so they discuss with enterprises and they try to gain momentum because, of course, enterprises are faced with constraints. NGOs are actors in the disputes. There are two major disputes: the disputes against the private sector, disputes that consist in asking courts to encourage enterprises to do more. There's a dispute today with a certain number of enterprises in the energy sector or against major French banks because some NGOs consider that their activity is not compatible with the Paris agreements, for example. So there are disputes also that are on the deforestation, for example. So these are disputes that apply a pressure on enterprises. For the moment, there are no real results, but at least they help to address very complex issues. These disputes are based on French law, and the enterprises we're talking about are multinationals. And for example, for a major energy company, they will develop new gas projects on the basis of energy choices in other countries. So that's a problem, you know, it's extraterritoriality. How can a French judge take a stand to impose on the basis of a French law to apply it to a French company acting in another country? Problem. Another kind of dispute showing that enterprises and NGOs are very active and the enterprises are a bit stuck is a dispute on greenwashing. It's no longer to know if we're asking companies to do more. The question is to say, you say you do, but you don't. And so these are disputes that we see arising here and there, and that will develop more in the future. We see the difficulty for enterprise to say much, but not do much. Thank you. Paolo, we heard everybody, so we see that enterprises act, they are constrained to act, the NGOs take action, but one question is more worrisome to close our roundtable. We see that there are major political debates in the US and France, in Europe, globally speaking. Do you think that people are now aware of the climate change issues, or should we still debate over this? Is this something, is the awareness there? No, the awareness is there. For two reasons, I think. First, all enterprises and businesses, I think their role is essential. Enterprises are responding to the demands of their clients. The clients of businesses are a force to orient the choices of enterprises. And second, there's a legislation arsenal like the CSRB, maybe you know that, which plants a setting. All enterprises need to have a double materiality approach. How climate change impact the company itself, its capacity, its resilience, and secondly, how the enterprise and what the enterprise does has an impact on its environment. So we see clearly this double materiality has moved things, changed things when it comes to take action. And there are two consequences. Maybe this will be for next year or next. The other part is that once you look on the business side, climate change for enterprises is a major challenge because there are three types of risk families to which the enterprises are faced. The physical risk, consequences of the impact of floods, of heat waves, or what have you. The second thing is enterprises, to be able to evolve, they need to innovate. When you talk about innovation, you talk about technological risks that businesses are faced with. And again, here, the insurers can accompany enterprises in their investment choices and how they use their capital. The third aspect, which is related, is the responsibilities of companies to act or not act. And so I think that the private sector and the private sector is strongly committed, chiefly in Europe and in developed countries. It's strongly committed to bring its contribution and also have a positive effect on climate change and to mitigate the impact on climate change, while increasing the resilience of infrastructures. Thank you, Paul. 3 minutes. So are there any questions for our panel members? I think we have time to take 2 or 3 questions. If anybody has a question. Yes, ACP Energy Association. First of all, on the question of climate change, I think we should talk about climate deregulation. We talk about greening the energies. Greening means decarbonating, but in fact it's to defossilize. I think the wording would be better if I take the case of NG that develops biogas. No, I don't have a question. These are just comments on the formulations. Thank you for your comments. Anybody has a question for our panel members? Or if not, I will hand over the floor to Claire. Yes, a question here at the front. Yes. The IPCC report recommends to change our living habits or ways of living. I heard the different panelists talk about what enterprises do. But in the last enterprise, you said that enterprises respond to the demands of their clients. I think that's a problem because the clients don't necessarily want to change their living habits. If I take transport, for example, that represents 25% of greenhouse effect gases emissions, we see that the public development policies that are with low CO2 emissions are not strongly developed. So how do insurers in this room, how do you intend to get involved along that path? Paulo, 1 minute, and Claire, 1 minute to conclude. I think that what insurance companies can do is they can give price signals to say how much a certain type of transport will cost compared to another. And our role, by giving price indications, if we accompany green transport, for example, maybe that insurance policy should be cheaper for green transports. So to be simple, give signs. Claire, 20 seconds. So 20 seconds to say that, first of all, I think this roundtable was very interesting. Thank you all. It demonstrated or showed the importance of the problem, the different level of actions. I take out some very concrete things that were said. Be careful where you plant the trees around your house, very practical. The obvious role played by communities, and of course the role of states, of enterprises, and the role of financing and all this. So we could have discussed many other things. It's the first roundtable, there'll be others. I would like to conclude with one idea maybe, is that the fight against climate change, it's not a luxury for 2 reasons. First of all, luxury is superfluous. I think that everything that we said, everything that the IPCC report shows is we have no choice. We have to act in a very determined fashion. The future of the planet, the future of the humankind is at stake here. That's the first point. It's not a luxury. And the second reason it's not a luxury because luxury is very expensive. And the good news that when it comes to talk about fighting against climate change is that yes, we will need investments, short-term investments. This is shown by other studies. We have to change cars. We have to invest in new production means. But the good news is that once we will have addressed the medium term, we'll be in a better shape, more independent from fossil fuels, more sovereign, and in a situation where there can be more growth and more employment in an economy that is decarbonated and defossilized. So I think this is a message of hope on which I'd like to conclude. I'd like to thank all our keynote speakers here around this panel. Thank you very much.
Bonjour.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being in such large numbers this morning for our controversy. AI reconciling virtual and real worlds. This morning we have Elizabeth Moreno, President of Ring Africa and Digital Women, Amphi Courtuis, General Director of SIA Partners, to come back to the question of generative AI and the launch of ChatGPT in November 22. Since then, we've seen frenetic activity in investment in AI, with new announcements almost every week from companies and organizations who've decided to start developing these software. We heard the recent launch of ChatGPT 4.0, making it possible to give live answers to questions and to making it possible to read. And also have QTai, a French company, developing an AI solution capable of answering voices. So there's many different innovations, and at the same time we've seen the emergence of a lot of worries and concerns about the role that AI is going to play in our lives every day and in our work as well. Some people are afraid that AI might replace the white-collar workers and the work of writers, and even the many different types of work. And because of this wave of concerns, we are going to have the pleasure of talking to our two guests. I'll start with you, Mathieu Courtecuisse, first of all. Concerning our theme, according to you, how do you think AI is going to enable us to rethink our social interactions? Thank you for your invitation. It's a very good question. I'm thinking that rather than talking about theory in this session, better to invite onto the stage an avatar or two avatars. So with our AI team, we have prepared an avatar for Elizabeth to be able to see whether today it is capable of thinking like her, or to replace her, or whether we could reproduce us or replace us. The question is, how is artificial intelligence going to get us to rethink about our social interactions? I'm going to ask the avatar. So, how does artificial intelligence make us rethink our social interactions? It takes a little while to prepare its answer. I'm asking my avatar. I've called this avatar. I've called the avatar Lisa. If it had been me, I would already have answered. So we have a network issue. That's what it is. The problem with the network. No, it's going to work. It's going to work. I just need to fill in a little bit while it's working. Okay, I've got the answer. So I hope it's going to work. Okay. Artificial intelligence is a wonderful lever to transform the world, the way in which we interact, but it will never completely replace social interactions. Seeing AI as an ally capable of improving our communication, of overcoming barriers such as geographical distance. However, it will never replace empathy or understanding. It is specific to human relations. It's vital to find a balance between our technological interactions and our interpersonal relations. AI gives this new way of interacting without replacing our authentic human connections. So does that correspond to what you would have said? I'm very impressed. I'm very impressed because I think it is just copied what I've already said. In fact, it just recorded it. No, so in that sense, it's impressive. It's also impressive to see how the tone of voice is similar to mine, and I hope I don't talk in such a robotic way. I think that this little exercise you've done shows that artificial intelligence is only intelligent to the extent that humans give it intelligence, because if in the end you had not asked the question in the right way, if you hadn't guided it in its search so that it knows who Elizabeth Moreno is, the person who's going to be on stage today, I can tell you that there would be some Latino bimbo in South America who would not have said the same thing as me, even though she also is called Elizabeth Moreno. So this means we have a few years to come before AI is going to replace me. I don't want to frighten you at all, but all it needed is to have 2 minutes of capturing your voice to be able to replicate it. This means that compared to anybody who's spoken up in the room here today, the capacity to impersonate somebody is something that can be done with anybody. You are a public personality. We've been able to collect information about what you've said previously in this subject. But in reality, it's not very expensive. It costs about a few €100 to do that. And we've really swallowed everything you've published over many years on this subject. So we can also see that in the cyber threats, we are entering a new era. You have people working in the banking sector, for example, who are here. If you want to call your bank to ask for a bank transfer, somebody who is not been notified in advance, this is very easy to do. It's not rocket science here. We're talking about a world where virtual and real worlds are completely merged, in fact. This is interesting, nevertheless, above and beyond this little joke that we've done just now. It's interesting to think that, okay, we've done this exercise, which isn't dangerous at all. But as you said, let's imagine each one of us in this room today, that our voice and the tone of voice, our words and the way we think could be captured. When it's done by somebody who's well-meaning, that's fine. But when it's done by somebody who is well-meaning without your authorization, it starts to become a little bit less acceptable. When it's done by somebody who I intentionally want to do something dangerous for you, I want to attack you, that becomes very dangerous. And when you say that it just needs a few €100 to do this, at a particular time when at the moment we have more and more fake news circulating everywhere in a breathtaking manner, imagining perhaps that our identity could be stolen in this way is something that I find very concerning. And I almost want to say to you, Mathieu, I can see how you use AI within your company to increase performance, to make your employees more effective and more efficient. I'd like to ask you, what does a company like SIA Partners do when you need to protect the identity of somebody who are building this artificial intelligence? In the same way as we're able to produce this, we can also control whether it's artificial intelligence doing it or human people doing it. But the techniques are changing very, very quickly and evolving. We also have to increase the cybersecurity technology using AI, to have a counter AI, to be able to have an adversarial strategy. And it's true that in the world of work, here we've seen the slightly negative aspect of it, but it also makes it possible to augment a lot of different things. It means you can prepare your activity in advance. For somebody who goes into a shop, they can be helped when they, if they're working in a shop, it can help them help their customers and guide their customers. It can be used in many different contexts. You need to see it as a method for augmentation rather than for replacement. So we're augmenting people, not replacing them. So our human interactions, I don't know if you remember that period during COVID, where at the beginning of the lockdown, we were very happy to work in our offices, in our bedrooms or in our kitchens, with pajamas on, with pajamas and trousers and a lovely shirt, a smart shirt at the top. We remember that after a while that human interactions, this made us realize that human interactions are very important if we want to be more effective and very committed and give real meaning to our work. When we're talking about committed employees, and we realize that already today, where AI is not fully deployed yet in the world of business, you can ask yourself the question, maybe artificial intelligence is going to even kill these human interactions even further. When the lockdowns were over, a lot of people no longer wanted to go back to the world of business, and the companies, they didn't want to socialize. They wanted to stay locked down. So if you push AI right to its full extent, I'm wondering whether we might not be in this situation once more because you're feeling uncomfortable at work, because you don't like your boss, or because your colleague was rude to you, or you're under pressure. Isn't this going to even more cut us off from our human interactions with each other? I don't have the answer to that, but what I do know is that there will be different possibilities. The capacity to develop digital twins is something we'll be able to do in different ways. It could be a way of providing assistance. If we're talking about AI today, it's seen as rather very much a software. But in fact, very quickly the world is going to be populated by humanoids. This is going to take place in the next few months or years. It's already taking place in logistics warehouses. It's going to take place very quickly, and we're going to have all of these different possibilities that are going to arise. It might involve the withdrawal of some people from their work in their daily activities, but I'd also like to see the positive aspect, the question of adaptation and cultural transformation. And I'm sure there will be many new opportunities for jobs as well. As it's we're having this discussion today, and I'd like to say that when you say that the world is going to be populated by more and more humanoids, that's probably true, but at the same time, we're also going to create more and more inequalities. One thing that strikes me, when digital started to be used, I hoped that this tool would be made accessible to everybody so that everybody would be able to benefit from it. What's happening today, 20 or 30, almost 30 years later, is that we realize now that we have started to worry about how the world has become digitalized. Whereas when you were saying that some jobs, some of the least valued jobs, or jobs which could be easily robotized, when this was the situation, nobody was very worried about it. People started to get worried about the jobs that were going to be replaced by digital because of AI, when it started to affect jobs such as lawyers or consultants and doctors and this kind of profession. What I fear is that this galloping AI may only be accessible to a certain number of people, to a certain category of people. This means that the social inequalities that exist today are going to be further accentuated, and it's very likely that the jobs that are going to disappear the first are the jobs done by people with a low level of qualifications, not many possibilities of adapting to this new digital world. And so legitimately you can ask the question of whether this artificial intelligence is going to reduce social inequalities or whether it's going to, unfortunately, accelerate and accentuate these social inequalities.
Well, in terms of inequalities, yes, I agree. It's really a societal issue here. The development of AI corresponds to two economic imperatives beyond social aspects. It's to respond to the aging of the population. That is a real topic. And the development of humanoids. You just go to Korea or Japan. You will better understand that they are faced with the aging of their population 15 years ahead of us. But it's a social imperative for them, for different trades, and there's another imperative for care, for example, is productivity. Yes, but the care trades accompanying the elderly, yeah, just to establish the link, the trades of care with humanoids and artificial intelligence. Okay. No, I think what's interesting with artificial intelligence, and I think you said that clearly earlier, is that it's to augment humans. I can imagine that a company like SIA Partners, if it's AI that will cover all these consulting activities that are extremely tiring or boring, and you know, people will, you can analyze 1,000 pages of a report for a client and say, here we can imagine that the human will be augmented with this, but on care activities, instead of enabling the human beings to save time, to enable humans to do better, to do what they're better at, it's possible that we give AI, we hand over our human relationships to humanoids. Is that what I understand? No, take retirement homes, for example. If there's a deficit of employees, like in Japan or Korea, you can take people, the cleaning activities be covered by humanoids. And so you can use the very small number of people you have available to accompany elderly people, to have exchanges with them and things. So you reallocate. And regarding the white-collar activities, there are studies showing that the use of AI as of today enable potentially to reduce over a 40-hour work week, 6 or 7 hours of difficult work, automating certain tasks and everything. So beyond the social aspect, what will we do with this productivity? Will we eventually move to a 30-hour work week or 4-day work week, or will we maintain the same system? These are social societal choices. And also we have to deal with social inequalities. But in terms of inequalities, what I'm concerned with today are inequalities between countries, notably those countries who produce these technologies versus those who only use them. And so the gap, the chasm that exists, look at the GDP of the US or Canada compared to Europe since the COVID, the gap is incredible. And we are at the beginning of this trajectory. So we need to go back to economic competitiveness in terms of technology and innovation. We need to deal with both these aspects. And here I think not only do I fully agree with you, I was convinced that this fourth industrial revolution, that is the digital revolution, would benefit to emerging countries. I'm thinking of the African continent, that really needs such tools to ensure its development and ensure its development leap. But we see today is that artificial intelligence only works if you have electricity. Then today you have more than 600 million people on the African continent don't have access to electricity. So how can we imagine that these people will have access to these technologies they need for their development? And then when we're talking about resources, let's talk about human resources, and you will not be surprised, I will talk about women. We have today less than 30% of women in Europe, back to Europe, less than 30% of women in industrialized countries, in so-called developed countries, that are interested with digital activities. They or who will consider cybersecurity or AI. So only 30% are interested in these work, but they use these tools permanently, every day, each and every day, sometimes without even realizing or even being aware of the risks linked with these trades. And the third resource I would like to talk about, this is more global, is that in order to make AI fulfill its promises and benefit to all, it will involve planetary energy resources that we do not have today, no longer have today. So how will we benefit from an obvious technological progress that will only serve part of the population, second, that will consume more than we can afford or overexploit our resources, and thirdly, respond to the global development needs? So maybe we see that we have two different points of view here. We have a real controversy. I can ask each of you, Mathieu Courtecuisse, what are the main risks that you see with the emergence of AI? And Isabelle Moreno, what do you think are the advantages we can draw from this evolution? I will respond right after, but maybe a little anecdote concerning Africa. I don't know if you know, today OpenAI employs 4,000 people in Kenya to work on models. So Kenya is associated as a strategic country to development of these models to work on the codes. So there are opportunities that are there in the value chain. So with a view to the risks linked with AI, it depends on the nature of the risks and for whom. I tend to see more the opportunities, the big challenge being the social acceptance or acceptability, which we need to have. And also, as Elizabeth mentioned, there's the energy consumption, but there's a little bit of hope. There's a light at the end of the tunnel with the in-media chips that consume a lot less energy. This opens up perspectives and opportunities that we didn't imagine. Just look at the energy consumption of what we call in France GAFAM. You take a company like Meta, its energy consumption increases of 4 to 5% compared to an enterprise whose revenue increases by 30-40% per year. So these enterprises do a lot of engineering and offer new perspectives for better control of the direct use of AI, knowing that in parallel we also have uses of AI that enable to work on environment transition, ecological transition. So here it's a concern for public authorities to know if it should be more involved. So in terms of challenge, I think there's the protection of data, personal data. And the little exercise we did with AI earlier was a good example. The copyright laws, people work for hours and hours and hours to publish a book or produce analysis or data of which they can lose ownership because anybody can reuse them. And there's also the issue ethics, because AI is just a tool. If the tools are misused, it can represent a danger. Also, planetary regulations. This has to be regulated, and hard to achieve because the biggest producers of these tools have such a power that there is no world regulation today that can protect individuals. I spent 20 years of my life in the world of technologies. I have faith, I believe in technologies, a lot of advantages can be drawn. I think 2 or 3 examples to this effect. Raise your hand if you remember the film Avatar. Avatar, yes. Okay, well you see, I'm crippled, I have a handicap. I was fascinated to see how this soldier, who in the real life could be in a wheelchair and who, thanks to artificial intelligence, thanks to, we could say, that by using a virtual reality headset, you can be an aging person in an old pension home, or you can be physically disabled, you can be a person who doesn't have a lot of financial means, you can't travel. Well, by staying at home in your chair, or in your bed because you have a disease, an illness, you can transcend all geographical barriers, all physical barriers, because what you live, what you experience in this metaverse world that is being created, well, you live in a virtual world, but you live by feeling the emotions as if you really live them. So I think there's a progress to enable us to travel in time and space. It's wonderful. I saw another example that was that really I found striking. It's a mother who had lost her daughter at the age of 3, and she just couldn't recover. And the psychologist decided to use artificial intelligence so that she could say goodbye to her child, and so that she could get an answer. As a mother myself, I figured, oh my God, this is going too far, and I figured what she was saying enabled her to recover. But what would have happened if she had really been hooked to this virtual image and she couldn't be separated from this image. Well, we're at the time of our humanity where we tend to stay with ourselves because we're so despaired. So what will happen if we consider that the world in which we live is so terrifying that we prefer to find refuge in this virtual world, because there we're beautiful, we're intelligent, we're rich, we have capacities and everything. So I see these possibilities of transcending us and transforming us for the better, but I see again these inequalities linked to the fact that one, it will not be accessible to everybody. Second, that there's no real regulation, and third, not everybody understands how it works, and consequently there are dangers that we ignore. Thank you. Thank you to both of us. Time is up. We'll have to stop here.